Hello and welcome to Endstep, the Upkeep After Show. Last week we were playing Preston's decks because it's his birthday around the time of the release of this video. And to celebrate, we wanted to, throw down with some of our friends' decks. And this is not the first time that we've done this. We did this over the summer with Steven's decks. We did this last fall, I believe, with my decks. Go check those videos out. And as always, Endstep's not going to make any sense if you haven't seen the game that we're about to talk about, because we're going to be delving a little bit more into these decks, a little bit into the game. So if you haven't seen the episode, you need to go watch it and come back and we'll have a good conversation. So why don't we go around the table and, Preston, you need to, whenever you have information to give, you have a little bit something to add, chip in. But we're going to go ahead and start by just going around the table. Why did you choose the deck you chose? Tommy.
I mostly chose Krenko because I've wanted to build a Krenko deck several times since I played Commander. So I figured this was a good way to figure out what it's like, especially in this play group, of what it's like to play a Krenko deck. So that was the biggest reason. Also just because it's real fun to create a lot of tokens. So
yeah. Steven, why did you want to do IEC? Is it just because Simic can do Simic?
The main reason was the just a lands, like a landfall deck. And I have a lot of cards in decks here and there that have landfall in them, but like a whole deck around like landfall. So I thought that was really interesting. That was the main reason why I picked this deck.
Jason?
Well, I kind of said this at the beginning of the video intro for the game, but I picked this deck just because every time I've seen Preston play this deck, it always just causes everyone at the table to groan, so much agony, and he gets so much advantage off it. And I was like, you know what? I want to get that advantage. I want to play this deck. I want to see what all the buzz is about. And I gotta say, Preston, I get it.
yeah,
so fun.
It's so fun.
And then I chose this deck because this is actually historically Preston's worst deck. It was one of the early decks you built. And just every time anyone would play it, it never worked, but it always was cool to me. I like sacrifice decks. I used to have a Thraxamundar deck. I played it on our Spell Table series a while back, and it was fun. I like sacrifice decks. So I thought I would give Preston the opportunity to maybe upgrade it a little bit, which he did right before filming this game, so that was nice. And, I did have a great start to the game, so that was really satisfying, but it's mostly just because this deck has never worked well, and I wanted to give it a chance because I think the potential for it was always really cool. Preston, this is really a question for you. Is there a deck of yours that you wish had been played in this game, either because you think it matched the power level better of the table, or maybe it's a deck that you have that isn't going to show up on another episode anytime soon?
I like my Betty Brax decks. That's my mono white token deck. That one's really fun. It could have been good against Krenko. Light Paws and Tristani too strong.
I
was going to say, didn't we ban Light Paws when we were selecting?
We all vetoed Light Paws.
Yeah, I think we just collectively vetoed that. But
if you want to see Light Paws win a game in 16 minutes, you can check out episode 6 of our gameplay series.
Is that still our shortest episode?
Yeah.
yeah. By far.
Yeah, the video is only 18, 19 minutes.
Yeah.
The game was 40 minutes.
Less than an hour.
So
yeah.
It was by far.
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Instead of this deck, I probably would have preferred if you had done my mono black deck, Mari the Killing Quill, which does similar things to this deck, but I think it's just way better.
It is a lot more consistent.
Yeah.
But we did just see it 5 episodes ago or something like that.
But
so
I don't think it really got to do its thing. So
no, yeah, it
another
definitely
chance
could
would
have
have
done
been nice.
Sure.
But no,
maybe you bring
like
it for Revenge Week.
Yeah, I like all these decks, so
yeah,
I'm glad with the selection overall.
Why don't we go around the table again, and what do you guys think, and this is a relatively small sample size, just this game, but based on this game and also just playing with Preston for a while now, what do you notice about how he builds decks that maybe differs from how you would build a deck?
Mine's going to be a little more specific that I saw in this game, but specifically the card Chaos Sphere, I probably would never have put that in a Krenko deck that I would build myself. Just because or at least not at the beginning. That may be something I would put in maybe later if I noticed that it was having trouble against flyers or something. But I mean, that's a specific card. But yeah, just overall, I think Preston just puts in a lot of sometimes more situational cards that may or may not benefit every game, but a lot of times if they do work, they make a big splash and are very important to that game. And I think that's something that I could probably do better in my deck building. It's just kind of higher risk, higher reward
Yeah.
type of thing.
So I'd say overall, if I were to make this deck, I mean, I tend to be cheap at first when I start building decks, just so I can get it to a point where I can play it, and then I'll upgrade it over time. But that's probably about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the commander of that deck is $25 by itself.
Right. Yeah.
But Jason, what about you?
Well, I've built a mill deck before, but it was really focused around self-mill. I wanted to get cards into my own graveyard just to empty my library and win with like Lab Maniac or Thassa's Oracle or something. I wouldn't have built the deck around this. Like, if I just looked at it myself, I would not have been like, this might be a really cool commander to play around. I would totally have just skimmed over it and ignored it completely.
Preston's decks seem to go into top deck mode a lot. And I think it's because he puts so many of the like just good synergy cards, like this is good because of this, and it helps the main theme of the deck or whatever. But I think that I tend to run fewer of those cards in my decks, and then just run more of the enablers. You know, I run. Yeah, I'm kind of overgeneralizing, but I might run a couple more lands than he does. I might run a couple more removal pieces than he does, a couple more board wipes, a couple more card draw spells, just to, you know, make sure that I get to do the thing. But then, you know, my downside of that is then, well, now I have less of the cool synergy pieces, whereas Preston kind of goes all in on those. What do you think you could learn from experiments like this? This is the third time we've done this on the show. Is there anything particular that you think you learned from Preston? Or do you think that there's maybe something you've learned in doing this again that maybe you hadn't learned the first or the second time that we did this?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been very open. I am probably the least experienced player at the table in both Magic and Commander, but even more so in Commander. So anytime we do this, I like seeing this as an example of how you guys build your decks, because I just try to absorb as much as I can of like, here's something that I never thought of to add to a deck, or here's an idea around building a deck that I don't really think about, because I've built several decks in the years that I've been playing now, but still I have only been playing for a few years, and so I'm just like kind of still in that mode of just like, I'm just a sponge of give me all the information I can get, and that I can then take into building my own decks. So.
Well, and you're in luck, because in a couple episodes we're also doing this with Jason's deck. So we will get around to doing an episode for Tommy's as well.
Right.
It's just I don't think it's going to fit into this season, but it is going to happen at some point, probably within the next year.
Well, because kind of going off what I was saying, when I started playing with you guys, or when we started doing the series for the channel, I had exactly 4 decks.
Yeah.
So it's like, we could have technically done it with my decks, but there would not have been any choice for it. You'd have to draw straws of who gets to pick first, basically.
Yeah. It's a little better now.
It's a little better. I have several more decks now, but yeah, so just kind of going off of that, I'm just like...
What about you, Steven? Do you feel like you've learned anything?
I learned I like landfall decks, which is I kind of chose this to kind of like see how a landfall deck would work if I wanted to build a deck like this, and I discovered that I like it. I mean, that's really I try to pick something that I think that I would like, but also might be a little bit different than what I might be used to.
So you just confirmed a suspicion you already had about yourself.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
You know, I wouldn't say that there's any specific thing that I learned in this episode, but every time that I see Preston's decks get played, it just reminds me of how good of a deck builder he really is. And so, if anything, the one thing that I learn whenever I see his decks get played is, if I ever have questions about building a deck, I need to talk to Preston and get his advice. But he puts a lot of synergy into his decks. It might not result in like what you were saying a second ago about, you know, card draw or board wipes or anything like that. But most of the cards that he puts into his decks, they synergize with what the commander wants to do really well. And that's what I've noticed about Preston's decks. His commander is always the main focus of his decks, which typically, you know, that's what a commander deck is anyways. But you don't necessarily have to build it that way. I don't think any of our decks were able to do anything if our commanders weren't on the battlefield. I mean, I know with Simic is Simic, so that's the exception.
Yeah.
Okay. But everything else, you know, it's built around the commanders really well. And so that's I think Preston does a really good job of building a good commander deck around the commander.
I am the #1 Drannith Magistrate hater in the world.
It's a perfectly fair card, but when you go 100% in on your commander, it feels really bad.
Yeah.
I think the main thing I learned is we saw a lot of this across kind of all of these decks. Maybe the Gyruda deck the least. But I have found that in at least a decent amount of my decks, I intentionally avoid things that take a lot of upkeep. I don't play tokens as much. I don't play 1/1 counters as much, just because it's a lot to keep track of, especially if you start having to do it a lot. But Preston loves that stuff, you know? So I think it's kind of fun, and it does kind of make me at least a little more willing to push myself into trying something a little bit more like that. So I'll reassess a couple of my other decks, and there are some cards that I've cut from my decks just because I'm like, I don't want I want to use the mental prowess to keep track of that.
Yeah, it'd be good, and it'd probably win games for him, but I don't want to deal with that.
Exactly.
But
But Preston's, he's made me willing to do a double take on that idea. So again, it's hard to tell because our sample size was this one game, but Preston, are all these decks kind of permanent parts of your collection, or do you think that some of them are like they're here now, they might not be here later?
I don't usually take decks apart unless I haven't played them in like over a year. So I don't think I'd get rid of any of these decks besides maybe the insect one, because that one has really struggled over the years. It did better this game than it used to, so
Yeah.
I made that better. But those two I'm definitely keeping. Some of my favorites. This deck, like if Tommy really wanted a Krenko deck, I would maybe work with him on letting him buy it or something at some point if he wanted to. This one I'm not sure about, but overall, those are some of my favorites, especially Gyruda. That might be my favorite deck overall.
And we did see it in the test episode of Upkeep, back in episode 0 it's called, which you can check out if you'd like, and it did well in that game as well. But with that knowledge, since these are decks that are more or less permanent parts of his collection, do you have any, like, again, hard to say because it was just the one game that we just played, but do you think that there's anything that maybe you could mention to Preston about maybe adding to the deck or for upgrades?
I feel like I have the least room to speak on this because of just what I've just talked about.
Yeah.
But, like, not that I can think of. I mean, obviously, in this specific situation, dealing with Gyruda, milling a bunch of my good stuff away.
Yeah.
Maybe some recursion, but it's mono red, so I don't even know how good you can get with that.
Mono red
and that's
has good
also
artifact recursion, but
and
that's
not much
about
else.
it,
Yeah. So I mean, so there's that. But also that's also a very specific situation dealing with a mill deck that focuses on milling your opponent. So I mean,
I know I should add more card draw to that deck. I just really hate red card draw spells.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Because
fair.
they're rummaging or looting or
Yeah.
impulse draw.
Yeah, there's a lot of luck involved with it, and a
Yes.
lot of chance. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have much that I would because one, I don't know the deck well enough, and two, I'm by far the least experienced deck builder here. So, yeah,
Well, and Steven probably doesn't have that much room to talk either because he won. But
he won in the dumbest way possible by playing all of our decks.
I think
all of
the
other
deck
decks.
needs more ways to play lands. I don't think it has enough.
but did you have anything to add?
Really, the only thing is maybe just trying to switch out some of the lands that I noticed that enter tapped, like will always enter tapped.
And because you had ways to like loop like Terramorphic Expanse and stuff like that, I almost wonder if it should just be like an almost entirely basic land deck. I mean, it
Lean
seemed like
harder.
it was, but I mean, at that point, why not just run more basics?
I think it's definitely cool to run more basics, especially if you are doing something like the
Looping
Terramorphic Expanse or
Expanse.
Evolving Wilds. Like that's really the only thing. Like just having fewer lands that enter tapped and don't have a way to not enter untapped.
Yeah, I feel like from what I've seen of landfall decks, it feels like you either want to go absolutely all in and spend thousands on the OG duels and the good lands that don't come in tapped, or you want a lot of basics. So that way you can both get landfall triggers and use those lands when they come in for...
I mean, for consistency's sake, you do need some duels.
Yeah.
Just for
Need
consistency's
some.
sake.
Yeah.
But,
for consistency,
but
for
in,
fixing, whatever, I get that, but like leaning harder than even most people would into
Right.
basics would be I think,
but
good.
it's because so much of the especially budget ramp is basic oriented. You know, the cultivates, the rampant growth,
Right.
and then like just budget ways to get multiple land drops a turn, evolving wells, terramorphic expanse. Those all have to deal with basics. So while I would traditionally run less basics so that I have better consistency, in a deck like that, you want as many basics as you can.
Right.
The main reason I have quite a few of those tap lands in there is only about a fourth of the deck is blue, but a lot of those blue cards have multiple blue pips. So it's really important to have enough blue to where you're not like, I can play one of these spells, but I just don't have enough blue at the moment. I have enough lands, but I don't have enough blue specifically.
And
so that's why I do that. But I probably could cut a few for a few more islands and a few more forests, probably.
between that and then the fact that there's no blue equivalent of Yavimaya to fix it for you. So
too.
like, you know.
True.
That, like I said, Preston does a really good job of building decks that synergize well with the commanders. And I can't speak for these decks. Obviously, Simic. Enough said.
We need to make a T-shirt that says "Simic be Simicking."
Yeah.
Something, yeah.
I feel like a lot of Simic decks you can build and never cast your commander, and it would be just as fine.
Every time I've seen Gyruda get played, and after having played it myself, I don't necessarily want to say it's perfect because I haven't played the deck enough and I don't know the deck well enough. But from what I played, I can't really think of anything to upgrade. It did what it wanted to do really well. I didn't feel like I was stuck at any point in the game. There was not a moment in the game where I was like, well, I can't really do anything right now. The beginning of the game, there were several things I could have done, but I chose not to in order to get the brick counters on, what's that artifact called again?
Altar of the Pantheon.
Something like that. So, because throughout the game, I didn't feel like I needed anything else to keep me going. I never felt stalled. I don't really have any upgrade suggestions for this. It's a really nice deck, Preston.
It is. It is a pretty consistent deck. I think I've seen like one bad game where he was like missing land drops or something.
Yeah,
but
and
I think just
that's just commander.
Yeah,
that's
it's
That's
just
just the
commander.
game. Yeah.
I think other than that one time, I think that deck has always been very consistent. Yeah, and then Preston, I know that you said this deck is the one that you might not keep around, but I would say maybe a little bit more card draw. I mean, you are in black and green. There's tons of like big explosive card draw effects, and then there's maybe a little bit more land ramp, like maybe rampant growth cultivates, because I might be misremembering, but when I was looking over the deck list, I didn't see a lot of cards like that, just because it's a 5-mana commander that is a lightning rod for removal, and a lot of the bigger impressive cards in the deck are also a little bit higher on the curve. So, but I think those two things would help bring it up at even another notch.
Most of the land ramp in that deck is creatures. That way I can use them to go land ramp, and then they're easy things to sacrifice without feeling bad about. That's how it wants to usually do that.
Well, I believe that's going to be it for Endstep. Preston, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about any of these decks, any part of the game, anything like that?
No, I'm glad they all were at least somewhat able to do what they all wanted to do. Like, I wasn't sure about Krenko and the Goblin ones, but they both did what they wanted to do. Granted, Krenko mostly did what it wanted to do over on the Simic board, but it still counts. So, no, I'm happy with how the game turned out.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Preston, for laying us your decks, and happy birthday whenever that is around the release schedule. Again, this isn't the first time we've done this experiment. You can check out when we did it with Steven's decks. You can check it out when we did it with my decks, and we'll be doing it with Jason's decks here in a little bit. And then make sure you're subscribed as well, because at some point in the next year, we'll do it with Tommy's decks as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoy these after shows. We'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.